with your families, and you were so quiet, and I saw some of you singing. It was just really neat to see you guys all there. And I look so forward to when we can all be together again and be learning God's Word, looking at each other face to face. Well, we've been learning a lot lately, and we're not going to let a virus keep us from learning about God's Word. Mr. Peter taught us a lot about Noah's flood last couple of weeks, but today we're going to be learning some things that happened after the flood. Now, I have to give you a clue. Some of what we're going to talk about has to do with snow. How can that be? It was about water. But we're going to be learning about snow today, so hang on. But before I do, I want to go ahead and review what we talked about over the past few weeks. Now, we know that Noah's flood was part of the catastrophe in our seas of history that we're learning. It was a terrible catastrophe. It was a worldwide flood that covered the entire earth. Now, why did God do that? He did it because of all the sin that was in this world. And he found one righteous man, and his name was Noah. And God asked Noah to build an ark, and it was big. Mr. Peter taught us all about that last week. I don't know if any of you guys were paying close attention, but do you remember how many school buses could fit into the ark? 480. I was listening. It was so huge. There with Noah's family and all the different kinds of animal. It was a really, really big boat that God asked him to build. Well, how long did they have to stay on that ark? From what the Bible tells us, it was about 371 days that they were on the ark. Just Noah and his family and all those animals. So today we're going to look into the things that happened after the flood. Now we know that it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, but we're going to read a verse from the Bible that tells us that there were some other things going on at the exact same time. And we also know that after the rain quit, it began to recede. And we're going to talk about some of the things that happened as the water began to recede. But we're going to begin with a verse out of the book of Genesis, chapter 7, and it's verse 11. And I'm going to go ahead and read that, but now listen closely. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. Now, the windows of heaven, we all understand. We call the sky above us the heavens, and we know that the rain came down. But what are these great deeps that were broken up? Well, from what scientists have learned at Answers in Genesis, it was that the crust of the earth had cracks in it, and they opened up. Now, I know some of you older kids have already studied a lot about the earth and the crust and the core of the earth, but as these cracks opened up, magma shot forth from the earth, and many of them were located under the ocean. So they sent hot magma high into the air, and as they went into the air, it warmed up all the oceans, and it sent steam into the air. So there was this water shooting up from the ocean and steam, and then the rain was coming down. Guys, we can't even imagine how much water that there was there. Well, we also believe that the earth shifted and that many pieces of the land just changed. We don't even really know what the earth looked like before the flood, but we know that it was changed forever because of sin. Well, after the earth had dried out enough, the Lord commanded Noah and his family to get off the ark. Now, the rain had stopped, but you know what, guys? It doesn't mean that the catastrophe was over, because the great shifting of the earth and the cracks that had been formed by God were continuing to move and shift. And all this shifting and moving caused a great many things to happen, some pretty amazing things. Now, have you guys ever heard of supervolcanoes? It's just a really, really, really big volcano. You guys know about volcanoes. But when volcanoes erupt, and many of them did after the flood, they would send ash into the air way high up in the air. And as they sent up the ash, it blocked the sunshine. The earth became cold because the sun couldn't get down with this cloud of ash in the air. And so many, many volcanoes were erupting during this time. The earth just kept getting colder and colder because of this ash. And the ocean was very, very warm. So there were some really big changes that took place. And something very interesting happened. You see, as the temperatures were cold on the earth because of the sun not being able to shine, and the oceans were very, very warm, there was a lot of water in the air that was moving on to the land. So, what do you think happened? It began to snow, and that was the beginning of an ice age. Now, I know we hear a lot of things that aren't true about the ice age, and the truth is that there really was an ice age, and there's lots of evidence on the earth about it. Glaciers are the evidence that we have that there was an ice age. Now, we know that most of the glaciers today are located north in the country of Greenland and south in Antarctica, but there are other parts of the world that have glaciers, including Africa, and Africa has a pretty warm climate for the most part. So glaciers let us know that there really was an ice age. So when did it start? Well, evidence seems to suggest from the people at Answers in Genesis that it probably started between 50 and 100 years after the flood. And so the flood happened about 4,000 years ago, not millions of years ago like the world wants us to believe. But here's the thing that's interesting. It lasted for several hundred years before most of the ice melted. So how did so much ice get on the earth? We've already been looking into that, but let's go back. Now remember, God caused the earth to shift, and the big cracks formed in the earth, and the magma came out. And the super hot magma poured into the oceans. Now, you guys get this. You understand if you're taking a bath and you say, "Mom, the water's so cold, please make it warm." So your mom comes in and she gets maybe a cup and puts some really hot water into your bathtub, and the temperature changes. It's not cold anymore. Mom made it warm. But these volcanoes caused the whole ocean to be very, very warm. Now, so we have warm oceans, and then we have all the ash from all these super volcanoes that have blown up and sent all of this into the air. And we have a cold earth. Now, let me tell you about a volcano that I got to experience, and many other people here have. It happened in 1980, and it happened in the very western part of the United States, in the state of Washington. This was in 1980. Now, at the time, I lived at the opposite end of the country in Alabama. From all that far across the country, we got to experience the ash that covered the sky and moved all around the world. Even though it was the time of year when it should have been really hot, some days it wasn't really hot because the sun wasn't warming the earth. It wasn't able to get down. So Mount St. Helens helps us understand a good bit about what it would have been like. But that was one volcano. There were volcanoes going off all around the world. It was the perfect setup for major changes in the weather. So the evaporating water, the cold land, the very cold land, it just kept getting worse and worse. Now in the summer, it gets warm normally. But during this time, after the flood, it didn't get very warm in the summer, and the winters were even colder. So because of all of this, the snow falling and falling and falling, as the snow mounds and just keeps pounding down into the earth, it forms sheets of ice that we know as glaciers. And these glaciers became so huge that they began to move across the land. In fact, there are parts of our world that experienced that. North America had glaciers upon it. But this kept going on for a very long time, and as the glaciers began to enlarge and move, they pushed into more and more of the warm places around the world. Now, we know that the entire world was not covered with ice. There were still warm places that you could go, but about 1/3 of the earth was probably covered with ice at that time. So we got to remember, it wasn't all around the world, just a good deal of the parts of it. But I just want you guys to remember that when we talk about the flood and the ice age, we go to God's word for that. Now, does the Bible talk about an ice age? No, it doesn't. But did God leave clues behind to help us understand that went on? Yes, he left fossils, he left glaciers. He left lots and lots of evidence that this happened after the flood. Now, there are some other changes that happened after the flood and during the ice age, because if you were a skinny animal and you didn't have a thick coat, you probably didn't do so good and you wanted to move away. And I'm sure that's what happened. A lot of the animals moved to warmer climates as the weather got worse and worse. But if you had a nice thick coat and lots of blubber around your belly, you were going to do really well during that time, because there was lots to do with all of that ice. And because of that, there were some animals that were highly unusual that lived on the earth. Now, most of them are extinct now. In fact, all of them are extinct. They have relatives that are around. But today we are going to play a game, and we're going to show you pictures of some of the ice age animals that lived, because we have their fossils and we know they truly did exist. So we'll have the pictures, and I'm going to help you guess what they are. I'm going to give you some clues, and you have to choose the right animal. Now, here are the choices: a woolly mammoth, a giant beaver, a ground sloth, a giant ground sloth, a saber-toothed tiger, and a glyptodon. Okay, here come the clues. Are you ready? This is the animal saying, I had thick fur to keep warm. I weighed up to 5 tons, as much as a pickup truck. I could be 9 feet tall. I had gigantic tusks that were twice the height of a man. I looked like a giant hairy elephant. What am I? Anybody know? That's right, it was the woolly mammoth. Very good. Now here's the next one. I could grow to be the size of a black bear. I was not as big and as woolly as a mammoth. I lived in North and South America. My smaller kinds today are all around the world, and they're known as being slow and lazy. What am I? It's the giant ground sloth. Whoa, he was big. Okay, here's the next one. I could weigh over 200 pounds. I could be 8 feet tall from nose to tail. My home was in the rivers of North America. My teeth were great for chewing wood. What am I? I bet you guys guessed that one pretty quickly. Yes, the giant beaver. Not like any of the beavers that we see around here today, that's for sure. Okay, here's the next one. I weighed 600 pounds and could be larger than a grown lion. I was a carnivore. I could open my mouth 120 degrees. Whoa. Whoa, he could open his mouth really big. I had 2 curved teeth that were over half a foot long. What am I? A saber-toothed tiger. Yeah, you guys got that. Okay, here's the last one. I could grow to be the size of a small car. I weighed 2,000 pounds. That's 1 ton, guys. Other animals were afraid to attack me because of my size and my protective armor from head to foot. The armadillo is related to me, but way smaller. What am I? Well, he was the glyptodon, and I know you've enjoyed seeing the pictures of all these animals. Well, kids, let's finish up. I just want to remind you that when we want to know the truth about what happened in the world, when we look at fossils, when we look at glaciers, we can know that they happened sometime after the flood, after 4,000 years ago. Not millions of years ago, like movies want us to believe and other scientists want us to believe. We look to God's Word for the truth, and I hope that you always will look to God and His Word for all the right answers. I hope you guys were listening. I might ask some more questions again about all of this next week. Have a great week, and I hope I see some of you at church. Have a great week.